exactly, man. But yeah, how are things?
Yeah, things are good. Just going through my Popperian Enlightenment over here, just...
Yeah, so we should just to give the audience some context, perhaps. You and I were talking on Facebook Messenger, and you were saying you were undergoing a philosophical revolution internally, and that seemed like an excellent thing to capture live on air. So a little spontaneous episode between you and I to talk about this internal revolution, and it obviously pertains to everything we've been discussing in the podcast, I guess, since the beginning. Hey,
yeah, really, it's really crystallized like a lot of our disagreements for me, I think, which has been very helpful on my end, and probably redundant on your end.
Well, no, it's because it's so I guess we're talking about like Popperian epistemology contrasted against Bayesian epistemology. There's not really a good word for it, but I've just struggled so clearly to explain this worldview, and so I'm really looking forward to kind of hearing what had clicked in your head and what you're seeing now, and just give me the whole download, man. What's been going on?
Yeah, I'll try and put it into words. This will probably change as I think about it more. I only finished Conjectures and Refutations a couple days ago, but the difficulty for me as well is I can't say I had a different epistemology beforehand. I would just say I had some vague notion of what I thought good ideas and bad ideas were and how to tell the difference between them. But I didn't have... maybe I was sympathetic for sure towards some of the Bayesian worldview, but I can't say I was an utter Bayesian, but nor was I an utter anything else. And so this has been helpful because it's just clicked a couple ideas which were seemingly unrelated before into sort of one place. And so, so what has this book done? The book, for those who haven't read it, obviously nothing I say here can substitute for actually just buying the book and reading it, because it's just so dense with fascinating ideas that it's just, it's worth every minute and hour you spend putting into it. But, he takes this simple premise that we learn from trial and error, and he looks at the consequences of this claim in every aspect of life, or through many aspects of life. And what seems like a simple claim at the outset, right? Something that we all just might agree with early on, like, trial and error, that, it's presumably kind of how we see kids learning, right? They're trying a bunch of things, learning about the world, they learn what they can't do, what they can do, what works, what doesn't work. And he realizes that this kind of has revolutionary consequences in many domains of life. So not only science and the demarcation of science and metaphysics, and just progress in general, but also for very specific political processes and how to think about the role of government, what the best methodology is for reform. You and I got into this a little bit, sort of incrementalism versus revolution, what the role of tradition is, what it can teach us, how we should think about utopian thinking, and the danger therein. What's the role of the social sciences, and what are the differences between the social sciences and the real sciences, and why does this matter for how we progress throughout life, right? And I would say the implicit lesson, I'm not sure if he explicitly says this anywhere, but as the reader, I think what you start to realize as you're going chapter by chapter is the sort of common sense notion that our solutions to problems are never final, right? And every time we've claimed in the past to have some ultimate theory, whether it's in the political sphere, the moral sphere, the scientific sphere, it always turns out to be wrong. And this is because humans are fallible. So we cannot see the consequences of our actions, and we don't understand the world in its entirety. And so we put forth the best ideas that we have at the time, but these inevitably turn out to have some gaps, right? Whether they just don't understand, they don't capture certain things about reality, or whether, that would be like in the scientific case, but in the political case, once you implement a policy or something, there are certain unintended consequences you can't see. And so what you start realizing as you're reading this book is it's not about trying to find the optimal solution to any given problem. It's about learning how to correct our thinking as we go along the way and correct bad policy and correct bad scientific theories and turn them into good ones to start generating knowledge in spite of our fallibility as humans, right? And so you realize sort of the main importance of a society is in its ways to correct these mechanisms to generate knowledge as we go forward, right? So we're never going to understand everything, and there are always going to be problems with any system we have. So the best thing we can do is try and resolve the issues as they come up, because issues will inevitably rise.
Well, so something to just to echo on that, which is that for a long time, people recognized that you can't have these bedrock foundational principles upon which to build all knowledge. And they recognized that, and they despaired about this. They thought well, what are we going to do? Like, God is dead. There's no authority. There's no foundational set of axioms that we can then build on. And Popper basically turns this on his head and says, let's just acknowledge that, and let's see what we can do with it. And the reason I love this idea is because it directly entails that progress is unbounded, that there'll never be an end to knowledge. Like when people first learn about, say, the Gödel and the incompleteness theorems, they, I think, take a pessimistic view of it. They think, well, we can never have a system that's both consistent and complete. But I just think, imagine we just found the set of axioms that were both consistent and complete. We could just put them into a computer and just mechanically churn out all laws of physics. And it wouldn't require any sort of creative thought anymore. It would just be entailed. We would be done. The project would be over. And Popper's view, which is, again, as you said, so on its face simple, but has such profound and deep and long-reaching consequences, is just that this can never happen. And that is why we're always at the beginning of infinity, why progress is unbounded, and why we can always continue to improve the world. Right. And so it's a source for optimism, not pessimism. Is all I mean to say.
Yeah, and he there's this asymmetry in his writing between truth and falsity, right? And so truth is hard to come by. Trying to figure out exactly what's going on at all times is very difficult. Truth is not manifest, as he would say. But we can recognize falsity, right? Because falsity is just contradiction arising, right? And so if reason means anything, reason just means acknowledging contradiction, right? Taking contradiction seriously as meaning that X and not X means something's wrong here, right? Both X and not X cannot be true. And so that's all you need to get off the ground with falsity. And then once you have this system where you can recognize falsity, it doesn't matter how hard, difficult truth is to come by, but you can just move continually closer to truth. You can move in that direction if you disregard bad hypotheses and bad explanations, and if you're honest about what's working and what's not working. And so, it's optimistic for this reason, right? Because we can sort of ever progress. And we can, even though truth is not just there in front of us for us to behold, we can get closer to it. And we can, whether in the political, moral, or scientific sphere, we can become better and know more and more over time.
And that's this other thing that's entailed with the Conjectures and Refutations framework of guessing and checking, whatever language you want to use, is that we're going to make bold guesses about how the world works, laws of physics, etc. And we can never be sure if what we've guessed is true, but it could be true. We'll never know it, but it's not as if truth doesn't exist, nor is it that we aren't in the possession of truth in some cases. We could be. It's just that every possible claim is itself subject to criticism, and any assumption, say that observers should experience the same frame of reference, that was just so baked into the assumption of physics that people didn't think to question it until Einstein came around. But everything is up for criticism. And in this way, we can start to accumulate knowledge as just the set of those guesses which have resisted falsification, for a long time, and
for the longest, yeah,
for the longest time. Yeah. But all knowledge is itself again up for debate and criticism, and yeah. So just to echo again what you're saying.
Yeah, exactly. There's no room for dogma in this worldview, which is very refreshing, right? Dogma of no sort. And so it is amazing how he just sidesteps around a lot of issues which philosophers have just gotten bogged down in for centuries, right? He just like sidesteps this issue of like debating about language, and he says, as you said, like let's acknowledge that this problem of trying to find the ultimate foundation for everything, this is not the thing we should be arguing about, right? That you can continually ask why to everything, right? I just view this as like the fifth grader who keeps asking why. No one's going to come up with a good answer if he just keeps asking why, right? We just need to acknowledge that foundation that doesn't exist, right? But that is not a cause for despair, as you say.
Oh, so we have this little club every Wednesday called History Beers, so where every Wednesday we get together and have a drink and talk about some thing in history. And last week we were doing postmodernism, and postmodernism is obviously a very wide subject, but one of the things that it says is that there's no such thing as truth. All positions are just language games, and what is true today might not be true tomorrow, and so it's very close to what Popper is saying,
right.
But it's different in a very significant way, because the postmodernists will tend to say truth isn't possible, and therefore we can't distinguish between alternative medicine and not alternative medicine, because it's all just relative. So it's the extreme relativist position. And it's really important to contrast against what Popper's saying, which is that truth is possible. Certainty is not possible. We can't be certain that we have truth, but certainty isn't desirable. And that's why it preserves all of the valid criticisms from those who say that, well, Einstein showed that Newton isn't true, and we thought Newton was true, and so therefore truth is impossible. No, it's not that. It's just that we can't be certain of any of our claims. But that isn't to say that we can't have guessed truth successfully. It is just to say that we mustn't be dogmatic with any of the truths that we do hold. And it's a very subtle but important distinction, because to echo what you were saying earlier, which is like Popper so gracefully sidesteps a lot of these issues by just so this is what I was trying to get across poorly in our previous conversation about just never biting the bullet on an impossibility. Like he recognized that foundational claims isn't possible, and so I'm going to make a theory that recognizes that that's not possible. You recognize that induction isn't possible, going from specific instances to general laws. And many philosophers before him were trying to figure out ways to say that induction actually is possible, like using probabilistic methods, say, or what have you. And he just said, no, it's impossible. It's impossible. So let's just make a theory that recognizes this and accounts for this. And it's a through line in a lot of his writing. Same with, say, democracy. Like Arrow's theorems show that you can't have a perfect democracy if you define democracy by equally representing the view of the people. It's provably not possible. So then rather than saying, okay, well, we can't have democracy, let's just accept that, we look for a deeper theory of democracy, right? And so this is this contradiction thing that you were mentioning, which is that like you can have a contradiction between two ideas, an idea that democracy should be about representing the will of the people, and the idea of Arrow's theorem. Or you could have a contradiction between an idea and reality. But whenever you see a contradiction, something must give, right? And so Popper is so graceful at just recognizing that some things are impossible, and then we need to build with a theory that accounts for that, rather than trying to get around that. So,
yeah, nice. And another thing which struck me when reading the book, which you had hinted at, I guess, or maybe you said explicitly, and I was just ignoring you, was the dignity, I guess, that he ascribes the human in being creative. And so what he doesn't do is say, these ideas that we're generating are hypotheses that we're coming up with they don't have to be generated in a specific way, right? There's no dogmatic way to say you're going to use reason to come up with this, and you have to use a certain logical system to deduce some axiom that we're now going to test. He says, no, this is the realm of human creativity and ingenuity. I don't care where these ideas come from, as long as we can, test them rigorously, and as long as we're allowed to criticize them as rigorously and harshly as possible. That's all I care about, right? So it leaves the door open for just creativity, ingenuity, no matter where you're getting your ideas from. You take a bunch of acid, that's great. You sit in a math class, that's fine. And so I found that very refreshing. Right? I think there's a lot of thinkers that tell you how you should be generating ideas.
Exactly. Like here is the prescribed way to be rational. Learn the rules of rationality, and then will spring forth ideas. But this just does not work this way. Like you can exactly take hallucinogens and go in a float tank. Or I remember one example that I heard of this that I thought was really great is the scientist. Who's the guy who came up with the singularity? Ray Kurzweil. So Ray Kurzweil, in one of his books, says that he can lucid dream. And when he lucid dreams, he'll just immediately, he won't do it like I would do, which is fly around and then like have sex with attractive people. But he just goes right to his laboratory in his lucid dream and starts working on papers. Because in this state of mind, he says he can be more clear and so he'll sometimes like lucid dream and just start like going through problems. And then in the morning he'll wake up and then like start filling out patent applications. Like I don't know how true this is, obviously, but it just is a nice illustration that one can get ideas from anywhere, right? And I use this in practice all of the time, where previously when I would be like writing papers, say, I would spend a lot of time like trying to write one paragraph very well, only to then show it to my supervisors or whatever and have them just tear the whole thing down, and I would feel devastated. And now I tend to just like write 50 bullet points without thinking, because I just want to get the ideas out there. And it's not about sentence structure. It's not about anything. I just write as many different things as possible, so that when I go into my meeting with my supervisor, we can just start criticizing these ideas together, because they're not really like mine anymore. They're just ideas that the two of us can start attacking. And so like for junior researchers or people getting into this world of research, in the initial idea generation stage, like quantity is so much more valuable than quality, because quality will come only through this mechanism of mutual criticism over time. But if you just write down 50 ideas and then just start that as a springboard, like this is just one of the many like practical life improving techniques one can learn from this way of thinking.
It's fascinating to contrast this against this like cognitive bias movement that I think David Deutsch was referencing in that video you sent me, which we can link. But there's this strand of psychology and behavioral economics which is focused on cognitive biases and how our brains don't work rationally in so many domains, right? We jump to conclusions when we shouldn't. We don't obey specific logical laws and whatnot in our thinking. And this is valuable to a certain extent to understand how our brains work. But there's a certain dogma that's associated with it in certain communities, like, until you learn how to think this way, you shouldn't be allowed to generate ideas, because you don't even know how biased you are, man. Like, and you need to rid yourself of all your biases before you're allowed to start reasoning, right? And that just does not seem like the way to. Like who cares how biased you are when you generate the idea? If the idea is good, then we'll criticize it and find out that it holds water, and if it's bad, then we'll criticize it and find out that we should throw it out, right? I don't care what sort of mental state you were in or how biased you were as soon as you generated the idea, right? That just seems like an absurd way to go about things.
Because we had in our very first conversation, which I haven't re-listened to, but I want to, because this is what I think we were getting at a little bit with this reference to like BattleBots, right? Where at the end of that conversation, we were like, I think you came up with this example, or I did, or it doesn't matter. But once these ideas are in the arena to be criticized, it doesn't really matter who is controlling the BattleBot, because we're all just in the same game trying to improve upon these ideas. They take on a life of their own. They are autonomous entities which can be rationally understood. But this separation between a person and their ideas is like of the utmost importance, especially in the political realm, say, because this is like one of the cognitive tools I use all of the time to allow me to talk with people with whom I disagree politically, because it's not that the person is a bad person. It's just that they are influenced by different ideas and I'm influenced by. And so when we're speaking, we're just trying to understand one another's ideas and criticize them because we both value the project of progress. And it's not like I thought, okay, I need to find a philosophy that will allow me to speak to my political enemies. It wasn't like I wanted a conclusion and then I looked for something. It was just, this was a conclusion that came from this worldview for free, which is that like people who think differently than you are to be cherished. They're like, it's the most valuable person you can speak with. And they should be cherished, and they like, they're not your enemy. They're your friend in some sense, in the sense that they're going to be giving you the most accurate criticism of your view that you possibly can receive. And so,
yeah, I don't want to go into too long of a rampage about echo chambers and bubbles and whatnot, but I think you're articulating one reason why I just find Twitter so toxic. So I don't have an account, but every once in a while I'll just log on and just like go to a page of some thinker that I think is whose opinions are typically valuable or something. And it's just mayhem as soon as I log on. I think precisely because people forget that there's this distinction between a person and their ideas, right? You go on there and it's like, as soon as someone has just like put forth an idea, it's like the mob just comes and is like, can you believe what this person said? We need to get rid of this person, instead of being like, okay, this idea is wrong for X, Y, and Z reasons, but you're allowed to stay at your job for it. And so, I don't know. It's just, that's a scary place to be. And I guess you see the more optimistic side of Twitter, I think, from
I see
our
Twitter,
conversations, but it scares me.
I see Twitter as like the most optimistic thing I could say about that side of Twitter is that like 100 years ago, it would just be like mobs of people attacking. And so it's same with like this whole cancel culture right now. Like obviously this is a huge problem for all of the reasons that that you and I are discussing. But if we compare what's going on now to say cancel culture in Russia during the Stalinist period, people losing jobs is not the same as people being sent to death camps. And this is not to say that this is excusable, but it's to say that there's still like Pinker's notion of progress is baked into this. And so with Twitter, I see it as an incredibly useful tool, which has a very dark side. And the usefulness comes from the sense that you can follow journalists. And so you can, it can be an echo chamber, so you have to be careful not to follow only journalists who agree with you, but you can find those people who really are committed to truth and committed to figuring out what's going on in the world. And then you can just follow them onto whatever news platform they go on. So if John McWhorter goes on to Fox, I don't care. I'll just follow John McWhorter because he has demonstrated that he's an interesting source of new ideas. And so in that sense, it can be really useful. But I don't tend to tweet out anything that... so I mainly use it for consumption rather than output. But,
I just finished... Oh, yeah, go ahead.
No.
I was going to say, I just finished Megan Phelps Roper's book, Unfollow, and she was raised in the Westboro Baptist Church, so the cult of all cults, the mother cult. And she cites Twitter as one of the reasons she was able to leave eventually, was like engaging with people's arguments on Twitter. The reasonable people on Twitter who weren't just yelling at her all the time, right? But so I do recognize that in certain cases it can be a force for good. I guess I just don't hear about those cases.
Yeah, so. Well, but in all cases, what's happening is it's allowing people to connect with those who think differently from them, and then start engaging with ideas that they had not been exposed to. And so Twitter is one way to do this, but like I have another friend who uses Reddit and just like gets in long arguments with strangers on Reddit. And I asked him like why do you do this? It seems like such a waste of time. But he just mainly uses it as a way to like sharpen his own arguments. Like he's anonymous, he's arguing with anonymous people, and he knows he's not really going to change their minds. Or he'll argue with like people on the Donald or like Trump websites and stuff,
right.
or Trump subreddits. But he just uses it as a way to see like, okay, what are people going to throw at me when I am talking to someone in the real world whose mind I do care about changing. Yeah. And so it's just a practice, I guess. And so it can be used, like all these tools can be used in ways that are beneficial and in ways that are not beneficial. And it's just about recognizing at the end of the day, it's always about argumentation, discussion, debate, and that's the one thing that leads to knowledge.
Yeah, exactly. Which just underlies the importance of actually wanting to change your mind or being open to changing your mind at the end of the day, because that's the whole Popper's whole point is that's the way we generate knowledge, is we like put forth hypotheses and then we criticize them. And so, but if you're not ready to have your ideas criticized, this is a huge problem and just leads to dogmatism and closed mind.
So the thing that like is so I guess valuable for me is once I really had downloaded these ideas, then I just started seeing how other communities tend to get it quite wrong. And so I'm in a really enjoyable email exchange with your friend Mauritius. How do you pronounce his name?
Mauricio. Yeah.
Mauricio, yes, just like the nicest guy. And him and I have been writing back and forth to one another because he's from the effective altruist movement, and we have very different epistemologies, and both of us are very committed to the project of trying to understand the other person's perspective. But hopefully we'll have him on after this email exchange has concluded, because should I say the Popperian view, critical rationalism, whatever the word is you want to use, in communities like the effective altruist movement, those who eschew this form of epistemology in favor of other forms of epistemology can, I think, start to reach conclusions which are erroneous, to put it lightly, and that can have real world consequences in terms of dollars and cents, and where people are putting their money and what problems people are deciding to work on and stuff. And so it's something I've been really interested in trying to figure out recently, is how do we bring these ideas into the wider community, because they're currently locked up in philosophical books that nobody actually reads and just thinks they know about, like Conjectures and Refutations, for example.
Right.
So I don't know, like, because you're kind of, would it be too much to say that you're coming from that community? I don't know if that's too much to say, but
no, I'm definitely coming from the community in the sense that I'm very, very sympathetic to the stated goals, right? So there's a difference between stated goals and then the methodology of thinking here. And so the stated goal is just, we have finite number of resources, and one of our biggest concerns should be how to increase the welfare of as many people as possible with those resources. There are those of us in wealthy countries who are unbelievably fortunate, and we should be dedicating a very significant amount of our time and money to helping those who find themselves in less fortunate circumstances. So in that sense, I'm very much a member of the community. It's debatable how much I ascribe to certain methodologies and, certain of their epistemologies. And certainly that's changing now, I guess, as I come into contact with you. But so as I'm sort of undergoing this Popperian enlightenment, I guess, I can't help but contrast it against this article you sent me called My Bayesian Enlightenment by Eliezer Yudkowsky, who's sort of a thought leader in the rationalist, less wrong Bay Area community. And so I would like to just contrast the beginning of his of this piece of writing with sort of my own thought process at the moment, because I think this maybe gets to the core of the issue, or how I understand you to be arguing against it. So he starts out the piece, I won't quote it word for word, but he starts out the piece with someone asking him this puzzle, where you're just on the street and a mathematician says, I have 2 children, and you ask, is at least one a boy? And she answers yes. And then the question is, what is the probability that they're both boys? And the correct Bayesian answer here is a third, because you have some prior information, you update based on Bayes' rule, and you follow the thing, right? And okay, so this is how he starts the story, and then throughout the piece, the importance of adopting this method of reasoning and applying it to all sorts of problems you encounter is paramount. This is what he's arguing for, right? This is a way of thinking which gets you the truth, which you should be applying in every circumstance possible, right?
Exactly.
And so what I take you to be saying here is, fine, if you want to argue about what the best subjective probability is to have when you're asking this question to a mathematician on the street, you can use Bayes' rule. That's fine with me. But what I care about is what's the step after that? How do we generate knowledge? And the simple answer for the Popperian is to say, you ask her, is her second child a boy?
Exactly.
Right? And then you get the answer.
Right. Yes.
I don't care
about
so good.
We
can have the side so there's a legitimate conversation to be had, right? In without the mathematician there, what sort of subjective probability should we have? And we can maybe get into arguments about, is my subjective probability more rational than your subjective probability based on a definition of rationality by E.T. Jaynes in some book written in 1970? And fine, we can argue about that. But how we generate knowledge is almost an entirely separate question, right? I don't give a shit what your subjective probability is. I'm gonna be like, okay, my guess is it's a boy. Who cares how you came up with that guess? If you're following strict rules of rationality, whatever. I'm going to say it's a boy, and then I'm going to ask the mathematician, do you have a boy, right? And that's the way to find out. It doesn't matter at the end of the day what your subjective probability is, right?
Yeah.
I think that was a good crystallization of me. I was just like, it's not necessarily. I can understand why you were having trouble refuting or arguing against this epistemology, because it's not necessarily wrong. It's just that it's focused on the wrong thing, right? Yeah. It almost has a different goal. It's worried about analyzing what the best mental state is to have at a given time, right?
Exactly.
My belief of the option landscape is better than your belief of the option landscape. And that's the wrong question. The question is, how do we find out what the landscape is and what's true and what's not true?
It's so good because so when you read Yudkowsky, who I respect a lot, he's a great writer, and again, as I said about Ord, I'm criticizing him because I believe he's a worthy target. He's not just some flake. But when you read a lot of his writing, it is exactly this mistake that you had identified earlier, which he's looking for some set of rules, some formula, some pattern to define rationality, how all rational people must think, should think, and then you're just going to use the set of rules. So in this piece that you're referring to, he talks about how probability theory was laid out not as a clever tool, but as the rules. And I say the rules because it is in italics and it's capital T and capital R. The rules. Inviolable. I've never pronounced that word out loud. Inviolable. Not able to be violated on pain of paradox. And then he says, if you try to approximate the rules because they're too computationally expensive to use directly, then no matter how necessary the compromise must be, you would still end up doing less than optimal. The rules. It's so bizarre. And the other thing that you so perfectly pointed out is that the tools that human beings use every day are not the rules, but questions, asking people, conversation, arguments, reading, just discussion, criticism. The focus on Bayes' rule within this community is, I think, because probability theory is so richly developed. There's a lot of math that can be used. And if you're also interested in AI, it is just so tempting to, I have this metaphor in my head of just this, chain of reasoning, it's made of adamantium chains. They're just they're completely rock solid. And this is what the mathematicians have built over the years with probability theory. Like each new step follows just in a bulletproof way from the previous step. But then the first chain, the one that's attaching this to science, is like this rusty, decrepit plastic chain. And people are so motivated to just look past the fact that that first chain is weak because they want access to the rest of it. And so the tying of probability theory to rationality, as Yudkowsky does, is, I think, because once you make that move, then you have access to this whole wealth of tools. There's so much you can do here. And so there's motivated reasoning in play. It's like, we don't want to acknowledge that there's lots of reasons why human beings don't think this way, and why it doesn't actually change people's behavior in practice, in the same way that, say, the advice to seek out criticism and express your ideas clearly so that they can be criticized will change your behavior. And so it's just there's all of this incentives to push people in one direction, which Popper refused to do, and instead built a entirely coherent framework which actually describes human knowledge production, but doesn't rest on a mathematical framework. It rests on a framework based on explanations and arguments. And so that's another key distinction between these two worldviews, is that one isn't mathematically axiomatized in the way that AI researchers would like, because if we could just use probability theory, things would be so much easier, because we have all the tools available to us. But unfortunately, it doesn't map on to the process which, like, human beings actually are engaging in every day. And so I just put all that as just both to contrast these two views, but also as a tentative explanation for why Yudkowsky and Lesrong and Miri and this whole community has been so seduced by probabilistic interpretations of epistemology, reasoning. Yeah. And like the EA community, can you differentiate this like satellite of this constellation of different blogs and authors and writers? Because I've just grouped all of them into like the Rationalist community, like EA and Marginal Revolution and Less Wrong and Slate Star Codex, and all of them I've grouped into the same thing. And maybe you pointed out that that's maybe not the best way to think about it. So I don't know.
Yeah, EA is just odd. It's related to the other ones. So I mean, okay, definitely, like, I would say Less Wrong and Slate Star Codex are very much related. I would put those like definitely in the same constellation. EA is weird because it drew people from there. So like Yudkowsky and Bostrom, I think, were the first like writing about the threat of like AI, right? And so one part of EA was sort of founded with that way of thinking, of like just people who are like, we should tackle the biggest problems, and then we're convinced like, oh shit, that's the biggest problem. But then EA's got it's got a different set of roots in like development economics, where there was just this revolution using RCTs, when it was like, holy shit, we can really try and figure out what's actually helping lift people out of poverty, right? So this is like the Banerjee, Duflo, Michael Kramer revolution that Banerjee and Duflo just won the Nobel Prize for, of just like, fuck, there are like effective interventions and non-effective interventions, and we can actually figure out which ones are which using RCTs, right? So like, then using that to say charitable giving is good, but it's not all equal, right? And we should not be giving just based on emotionality, because there are things that are literally 1,000 times more effective. Like, some charities are literally like 1,000 times more effective than other charities. And so we don't want to we're going to want to encourage people giving towards the best charity. So that's like the RCT, development econ, and then GiveWell portion of it, right? So GiveWell, and then there's like Less Wrong, and those kind of form the two
poles,
the two
or whatever
poles, of EA. And then there's people who are drawn, and so that's like the giant spectrum, right? And then you have people drawn to various parts of that. So like, I'm mainly got interested through the GiveWell side of things, just like, fuck yeah, we should donate to the most effective charities. And then you get into the constellation, and then people, are focused on different things within it. And the reason why the community is so weird is because, like, it doesn't have an express cause, right? Like, most like activist groups or something are like, we are for prison abolition or something. That's our thing, right? Like, and EA's cause agnostic in that sense. It's just like, just talks, like, it kind of shifted. At the beginning, it was like, everyone was talking about this thing called, earning to give, which was like, maybe the best thing to do is actually just, if you were like smart and quantitative, go be a hedge fund person or go be a quantitative analyst and make like $300,000 a year and give away 200,000 of it. In this way, you're going to be able to pay the salary of a bunch of people at nonprofits and sort of maximize your, right? So about these counterintuitive ways to like do the most good. But then they shifted away from that. So anyway, the point is like the causes that they sort of champion change over time based on, typically based on evidence, especially coming from the RCT stuff. But now they've sort of gravitated towards this expected utility maximization to AI thing. And what's worrying is like, you can't really refute it, right? You just say, well, the fucking expected value is 1 billion times 1 trillion of helping, if I lower the risk of AI by 0.0001%, then I've helped an expectation 1 billion trillion people. And so this is much more good than on the ground work in Cambodia or something, trying to lift people out of poverty. And so
take it to its extreme, it would justify working on nothing but this one problem. It's like which is frightening because this argument could be made with anything. It could be made with working on asteroid collision. Like, that's the number one most important cause to be working on, with some justifications, and so like you could do this with anything, and the reason it's done with superintelligence is because that's the best argument that can be developed for this, right? It's not done with asteroids because you have quantitative methods, and so you wouldn't do this with asteroids because there's the temptation's not there because you can just look at counts. But it is not an accident that this omni-applicable argument is applied to the one thing that is about the future, which we can't know. So that's
interesting. Yeah, you saying that made me realize there's got to be a connection here with like the best explanation, right? Like the explanation as to why we should focus on AI does not, in the Deutschian sense, does not seem like a good explanation, right? It's like very easy to vary. Like you could vary all sorts of things about it, and it's like, it doesn't matter. It's still a possible existential threat. I don't care what we learn about AI now or in the future. It's like the easiest. It's just like it's a terrible explanation of what's
exactly. Which is so and for that reason, exactly for that reason, like I'm quite hostile to this idea. Not because there's like not some reasons to work on like value alignment, for sure. Like value alignment is as appropriate to work on for YouTube, where we didn't expect conspiracy theory recommendations to be like, that's a value alignment problem. Fair. Let's work on all of that. But yeah, like it is unknowable. It is fucking unknowable. Like, and because it's unknowable, people use these just easy to vary explanations, and then the explanation isn't just easy to vary, but it's hard to counter because it requires so much math. Most people don't want to study probability theory and figure out what an expected value is. By the time they've learned what this goddamn thing is, like they're already into the community. Exactly. So this like mathematical smokescreen is a huge problem because it seems reasonable. Then someone has invested 6 months into their life to understand what this stuff means and how you work with it. Like, how difficult it is to learn mathematical concepts. It takes a long time. It's a big investment of time.
Yeah, nice. Okay, so let me Steelman. There might be people who are thinking we're giving a very unfair representation to the Bayesian right now. So let me just try and Steelman for a second. And so, the Bayesian here might say, of course, if the mathematician in my example is in front of you, you just ask them whether their second child's a boy. None of us disagree with that. It's not as if we're trying to remove ourselves from the conversation and just do all this math instead of asking for answers, right? I think they would say, but what we're trying to do is develop modes of reasoning that are reliable when such mechanisms aren't in play. So when the mathematician's not in front of you, what do you do, right? You have to like make a decision, and you want to try and weigh the likelihood that it is a boy versus it isn't a boy. And so we want to develop the best tools to do this, and we want to come up with the best mental models so we get the best answer as reliably and often as we can. And so this is where I think things get a little trickier. And so this is where communities really start to diverge, because this now you start talking about what we've been talking about the last few episodes, like, how do you weigh the risk of certain possible existential catastrophes? How do you start talking coherently about like the risk of nuclear war or something? And what I think where I have just changed my mind is, before I think I would have thought probabilistic reasoning is a good way to do this, and now I just think it's ensconced in so much uncertainty about the world, and that it's just intractable to try and reason about far out consequences like this, that it's just not going to work. And so it's, yes, sure, you can have, like, with the information, you can have some prediction that maybe is like mathematically the most reliable, but that reliability is just swamped by the sheer amount of uncertainty that future events have, because, we can't tell the future. So instead of like trying to think really hard about exactly what our best credence should be, we should be trying to like engage with as many of the ideas and arguments as possible in order to figure out like what's tenable and what's not, instead of just relying on coming up with the best number, basically. I'm just, like, it's unclear to me what you should even do with that best number, given that it's so reliant on just people's subjective beliefs about things. And I don't see what reason we have to just trust like people's subjective sense of uncertainty.
Precisely. It's something that occurred to me a couple days ago, actually, that like even the word uncertainty implies that what we want is certainty, right? We are uncertain, but what we really want is certainty. Contrast that to the word unknowability, which is now one that I'm preferring. Certain things are unknowable because, first, knowledge can be used in both a subjective and objective sense. But when I'm using it, when you're using it, when Deutsch and Popper are using it, we're using it in the objective sense, knowledge in terms of libraries and Wikipedia and the textbooks, objective knowledge, things that if we were to die tomorrow and then all wake up, if we were to be, if our memories were to be wiped tomorrow and then all start reading the textbooks, we would regain this subjective knowledge, right? So uncertainty is a primary focus in the Bayesian worldview, because what matters is not objective knowledge, but accurate beliefs, and it's all about the internal life, the feeling of belief, the belief states. And so I now will tend to start using words like unknowability, because there are certain things which in the future are in principle unknowable. Unknowable because it depends on future knowledge and future ideas, which we by definition don't know and can't have. It's the evolutionary view of knowledge is super useful here, because you view knowledge and ideas as just being the products of an evolutionary process. You have the random mutation, and that just comes from however we creatively generate these ideas, from float tanks or from hard study. And then we subject it to an environment of criticism, which then mutates these ideas and new ideas come forth. And so in the same way that we can't know what is going to be evolved in 100 years, because we couldn't possibly imagine the environmental circumstances that will direct evolution in this way, so it is with knowledge. We can't know what's going to be produced in 100 years, because if we knew it, then it wouldn't be produced in 100 years, right? And so this difference is elided in the Bayesian worldview, because they just talk in terms of uncertainty, meaning, well, it's very uncertain, but you can still get a bit of certainty. And instead of having a hard binary, we can't know this it's possible to know this. So there's some stuff which is in principle knowable. I just don't know it yet. So for example, I'm looking at the plant to my right, and I don't know how many leaves are on it, but I could, in principle, know that just if I wanted to. I could go over there and count them. So there's some things which are not knowable, or not known but knowable, and some things which are, in principle, not knowable, such as the future. This is a really important distinction. But when we just talk in the language of uncertainty, the hard binary of truth and falsity, which is so important. Why is it important? It's important because if you make the binary truth and falsity onto a continuous spectrum, it's really hard to falsify. It's hard to have this mechanism of contradiction work, because now we're just talking along a continuum. So this whole distinction is now collapsed into just uncertainty. And I think this gets us into a lot of trouble, because it allows this probabilistic view of the world to be so deeply entrenched and not falsifiable, not shakeable, because one can always just say, well, it's just more uncertain. We just need to widen the Gaussian a bit. And rather than saying, okay, this isn't knowable, so I'm going to spend my time working on a different problem, right? People say this is uncertain, and therefore I'm going to spend time trying to reduce certainty. And it, like, another important takeaway message from my reading of Conjectures and Refutations. Let me not even say takeaway message. Let me say a very specific way in which it's improved my life has just been in the way in which I decide which projects to work on. So for student researchers who are just getting into this world, like you begin to develop almost like an aesthetic sense for what problems are going to lead to like decent results, and what problems are just completely futile to work on. And it's very hard to write down what it is that defines a good problem and a bad problem, in the same way that it's very hard to write down, like, what is it that made so-and-so friendly or creepy. It's just like an innate, intuitive, almost like aesthetic thing that we can just sense. And reading Popper has allowed me to get a sense for what it looks like when people want to try to know the unknowable, and the amount of futility which that is going to create for them in their life. And so I just throw that out as like yet another reason why it's at least valuable to get familiarity with these views, because viewing knowledge as an objective thing which we can understand has very transformative and perspective-changing implications that you don't get if you just talk in the language of belief and certainty all the time. And so, I just want to add that. Yeah.
Nice, yeah. Yeah, I guess the big problem I'm running into with, like, this Bayesian epistemology is that once you define, like, knowledge in terms of the certainty, once you start, like, collapsing these definitions into one another, you all of a sudden are left in a position where you have to take seriously anyone who, like, claims a little bit of expertise or something on a topic and has, like, if you're dealing with, I'll make this concrete, like, if you're dealing with numbers, and you brought up this problem when you were talking with Mauricio in the email exchange, if you have some group of experts you're trying to listen to, and you're trying to form some prior probability beliefs, so you're trying to get a number out of these people, right? And now you're kind of at the whim of their numbers, not their arguments. So if one says, I have, like, people are giving you what are perhaps reasonable probabilities, whatever that means. Like, 99 out of 100 of the experts are saying, like, well, probability 1/2, 1/3. But then one of them just says it's, 10 to the negative 90, right? All of a sudden, well, now, if you define them as an expert, now you have to listen to this, and this just completely outweighs everyone else's opinion, right? Regardless of how, maybe they actually have no idea what they're talking about. Their argument is terrible, and they're just mad because researcher 92 slept with their wife or something, And, like, now you're at the whim of having to take this number super seriously, instead of it just being like, what's your argument? So I think you were trying to make this point in I feel like I'm just basically recasting all the points you've tried to make over the course of the episodes, and they're finally entering my brain somehow. So I think you made this point in episode 7 or something, but I'm seeing the power of it now. Like, yeah, if you take numbers as primitive, as building blocks of the arguments, you're at people's whim of just like their subjective belief, and like that's not what we want, right?
Exactly.
The point of progress is that people's subjective belief is wrong all the time, right? This is, I think you said, this is what constitutes, like in Thomas Kuhn's language, a paradigm shift in science. Is when an entire community is sharing a certain paradigm, which happens to be completely wrong, Newtonian mechanics or something, and then we have the Einsteinian revolution, which says, you guys, all your subjective beliefs were shit, this is what's actually going on. And so you want to be able to listen to that, and anyway. So that's a big problem, I think.
That's exactly right, and I've tried like 50 different bloody ways to communicate this, and I have just been struggling, man. Like, that was what my stupid example with I was trying to talk about with the email, like imagine emailing all the experts and getting numbers, and then emailing all the experts and getting arguments.
Right.
This was my attempt to like just say that there are other, like, don't treat numbers as primitive. Numbers are one set of symbols which can explain some phenomena very, very well. It's one tool that we've had. One tool that we've invented. But so are English sentences. So, like, if you want to explain the First World War, I wouldn't reach for numbers as my primary tool of explanation there. I would reach for explanations about the power of nationalism and et cetera, et cetera. Like, history books are as much knowledge as mathematics textbooks. But history doesn't tend to use numbers except when it's appropriate, right? And so just viewing ideas as primitive and then viewing ideas as being essentially, it's like symbol independent, right? Like when I'm writing a paper, say, I will often, like, I'll always first be pressuring myself to put an idea into English language first. If I can write it in English language, that is almost always better than using math. But some ideas are just super awkward to do that, and so then I use math. But then sometimes I'll try to put it into English, and then it's still, like, the idea is not really becoming clear, and so then I'll say, like, oh, maybe I can put it into, like, a graphic, say. Or in some extreme cases, like, a graphic doesn't even work, and I'll have to try to put the idea into, like, an animation. But all of these are just different ways to express an idea. And the mistake, I think, one mistake occurs when one considers the numbers to somehow be superior to all other ways of expression, ways of expressing oneself. And so to say to someone, like, numbers aren't the primitive object anymore, is for them to think, well, you're trying to get me to abandon the quantitative method? Like, are you nuts, man? And I keep running into this in the sense that no, this is just one tool to express ideas. And if we start taking numbers as the only tool, then I think it can lead to problems. And so I don't know. So I think at the end of the day, it's just going to be like, dude, just read Conjectures and Refutations, and then you'll see what I'm saying. But I'm going to keep trying to figure out ways to make this point, because like as the episode 7 or whatever will demonstrated, like, it's just very hard to communicate this stuff. And I don't know, like, do you have any recommendations? Because I guess you're fresh from viewing it one way versus the other way, and so I would love some feedback, or not, feedback's too self-centered. I would just love to brainstorm about, like, how can we free people of this view of numbers as being somehow fundamental. I don't know. Did the question at least kind of make sense?
Yeah, it's hard. It's one of those things. In retrospect, it's hard to say exactly what changed your mind, I suppose. Yeah, I guess a lot of it might just come down to thinking about your daily life, and as you're going about your life, what's actually informing you about things? How are you forming decisions? How do you go about reasoning about things in the future? I think you rarely sit down with a pen and paper, or not even with a pen and paper, and just come up with, like, your best number for something, right? Typically you just go out and you start testing ideas, and you start asking people, you write an essay and you solicit feedback, you call your parents and you ask them what they think about something, right? Because relying on numbers is just to rely purely on your own brain and its ability to somehow predict things about the future. And that
it's like relying on your unconscious.
Yeah.
It's like you're kind of saying like that your unconscious mind, which you don't have conscious control over, will just serve you up like the correct number. It's this almost like Freudian view of the power of the unconscious, rather than recognizing that reasoning is a conscious process that we all do all the time internally and then externally, where we have like I'm writing an essay and I need to write the next sentence, and in my head I will think of 3 or 4 different sentences and I will internally criticize them, like, oh, that one's not even grammatical. This one, if I say this, well, then that won't make my point very clear, so that's a bad sentence. And then I'll write the next sentence, and then you write your essay or whatever, and then you go and you reread it, and you're constantly criticizing yourself when you're rereading it and rewriting, and then you give it to your friend and you ask them to do the same, and then you subject it to the peer review process. And what's that? That's the same thing, just your peers criticize it, and then it goes out into the world, and then it's subjected to the world's critical process where journalists will write about it, and your fellow academics will write and criticize and hopefully poke holes, and this is just the whole process from the very beginning, when you're writing a sentence, to when the idea is birthed into the world. And to fail to see what's like right in front of your nose is, I think, in the best case, just slightly misguided. But in the worst case, I think it can actively prevent one from doing good science, because they're relying on the wrong mechanisms. And so I think it's a deep problem. And yeah, I don't know. And so that's why, like, this has been the underlying, would you say, difference in opinion? I would say going back right to the first episode. And if we were to re-listen to all the podcasts, I think you would see me struggling in many different ways to try to communicate this. And now that, like, you've read the primary source and you see, like, all of my misattempts, is that even a word? All of my poor attempts at trying to explain these ideas. I'm hoping you can join me in the project of trying to communicate these ideas successfully. Because
totally. It's because I mean, it's difficult. I think back to what I said earlier. I think the emphasis is just on different things, right?
Exactly.
I don't necessarily think Bayesianism is wrong. Like, if you want to try and figure out how to have the most accurate subjective belief states over time, and you want to use numbers to do that, that's like fine, right? But what it does is collapse the field of creative decision making into one of purely an analysis of ideas, right? So it's sidestepping the most important part of knowledge creation, which is generating ideas to be criticized in the first place, right? And so Popper's really emphasizing that initial phase, right? We have problems in the world, and then we generate, whether it's scientific, political, whatever, and then we generate a bunch of ideas and we subject them to a bunch of criticism. And so he's really emphasizing the step of, like, we generate ideas, we using whatever mechanisms we're in whatever psychological states we're in, we just, we generate a bunch of ideas. Whereas the Bayesian is much more focused on the world after that step. That's what I gather, right? It's much more, the ideas are out there, and now you have to evaluate them, right? And the Bayesian's trying to evaluate them in a very specific mathematical way, using probability theory. So that's why I think the translation between these is not straightforward at all, because you can't, it's hard to point to specific instances of, like, the Popperian or the critical rationalist would do things this way, and the Bayesian would do things this way, because you're focused on different aspects of the problem. And I would say the Popperian worldview sort of encapsulates the Bayesian one, right? Because sometimes Bayesian methodology is the most appropriate given the circumstance. If you're sitting in a math test and you have to know what is the probability that the mathematician second kid is a boy, then God, you apply Bayes' theorem till the sun burns out, right? It's just not always the most appropriate tool. And indeed, it's not even the most important step in terms of how we generate knowledge. So
it occurs to me that one of the distinctions is this distinction between being a onlooker versus a participant. So the Bayesian view is kind of like, here's a bunch of ideas. Let's not discuss how to generate more of them. Let's discuss how to weight existing ones and figure out which ones to believe in. So I, as an onlooker, have to choose which ideas to believe in. The whole thing is focused on belief. And then we're gonna come up with the most accurate way to figure out which idea to believe in. Where the Popperian view says, no, goddammit, you're not an onlooker, you're a participant. Anybody is capable of producing new ideas, and belief is something which doesn't enter the picture till much later, and it's the significance of belief is so down played. It's what matters more is just participate in generating new ideas, and here's how you can participate. And you don't have to be a fancy scientist. You don't have to be anything. You just have to be a creative human being, which we all are. And all you have to do is do your best to speak clearly, generate as many ideas as you can, and then elicit as much criticism for those ideas as you possibly can, and criticize other people's ideas in such a way that, so I guess the other thing is that it's not like nihilism or a criticism like you tend to get from the postmodern camp, which is just like to deconstruct. The whole point is to take down other people's ideas. It's very much a constructive approach, not a deconstructive approach. It says the way that we construct better ideas is by criticism, but we recognize that some of these guesses might be true, actually. And so it's different from, say, the petulant child who will just say why, in order to just confuse and annoy their parents, right? It's more just saying why because we need to your answer might be true. It might be the final state of knowledge on this particular problem, but
or contain elements thereof,
or contain elements thereof. And so we need to criticize it and poke and prod it. But then there are other problems too. So like at some point, the answer that you're going to give me will be satisfactory enough to be able to move on to a different problem. So it's not just a deconstructive, burn it all down approach. It's more like, let's shake the foundations just so that we can be sure we can stand upon them approach. And so the emphasizing different aspects of rationality, I think, is so key. You're absolutely right. And it's very hard to convey this until someone just does an A/B test and reads both literatures, read Less Wrong and read the Conjectures and Refutations. But the overlap is so stark too. Like the site is called Less Wrong. We all want to be less wrong. But even implied in wrong is that it's who's wrong. You're wrong about your beliefs rather than ideas are wrong because they contradict with reality. So the whole focus is internal subjective rather than external objective. And that emphasis is very important, I think. The shift in emphasis is very important.
Yeah, nice. So I guess, so we're going to do a series on Conjectures and Refutations or what? And
man.
I think if we do that, it'd be helpful, especially to keep listeners engaged, if we sort of tie each chapter that we decide to listen to some event, whether it's historical or something happening in the current political moment, that really demonstrates why these ideas matter at the end of the day.
Exactly. I don't know if this is like an announcement. That's maybe too bold, but yeah. So the rough plan is to try to go through the whole book, or at least chapter by, not sequentially. We'll just keep picking chapters and talking about them until we move on to other stuff. But yeah, and the reason that I think this book is so important is because the applications to real life are immediate. It's not like we have to think I can turn my head to the right and look at a houseplant and come up with an application of these ideas, because he's describing the real world. He's describing what everybody does every single day. And so we will absolutely be tying it to reality as much as possible. But I just want to emphasize that for anyone who wants to get this book and read it, like I think many people think philosophy is going to be written in this very arcane jargon that is hard to understand, but nothing we can say, it will be clearer than if you just read the book. Like he's one of these few authors who are unsummarizable, because any summary is probably going to be less clear than the original text itself.
Yeah, exactly.
And so anyone should just pick it up and read it, because it's quite transformative. So the first one we're going to do, I guess, next time is on his chapter on traditions. Is that what we decided?
Yeah, I think that'd be good. We relate it to the current political rhetoric and the idea of like taking down statues and all this stuff, and maybe get into some hot water there. We'll see what happens. But
yeah, exactly. And we definitely have to have Mauricio on. So him and I are, I think, like almost done this email thread. I sent a big one, and he sent is I think working on his. And so it'll be just great to have him on to talk about all these ideas too. I want to do a bit of it in writing first, because I had struggled so much to communicate this live. So it's nice to put it into writing, and he's just been so great. So hopefully we'll be able to get him on as well to talk about all this stuff. But
wicked.
Cool. Well, let's looking forward to it. So we'll start the next one, I guess, next week.
Sweet. Yeah, let's do it.